Hi everyone, my name is Eduardo. I'm a member of Vue.js core team, the author of the Vue router, and also a small library called Pinia, which is an alternative to Vuex, designed around the composition API to deal with state management. But today I don't want to talk specifically about state management. I want to talk about what's beyond that with Pinia. However, I cannot go beyond state management without talking about state management itself a little bit first. So state management, what is really state management? Is it just an object that you mutate with a few functions? Would you call that state management? Well, the truth is, some people will tell you that it is state management. They will call these state management. And to be fair, they wouldn't be totally wrong. To prove the point, if you actually wrap that same object, that same global object with just reactive from Vue, we do have a valid state management that works seamlessly with Vue. Any updates to the state are going to trigger template updates, etc. And this isn't complex at all. If anything, it's even simpler than a Vue component and a Vue file. And the truth is, state management doesn't have to be complex and can stay this simple for bigger apps sometimes. And there is this myth about state management that it should only be necessary with big or medium to big sized applications. And these couldn't be further from the truth. Because state management is not about the size of your application or code base. State management is about how you use that state across your application. For example, is your state outliving pages? Do you require the user information in multiple pages? And so when the user logs in, you need the information no matter where you are. Do you want to keep track of some of the user actions across pages? Do you need, for example, the shopping cart to keep track of any items the user added while they were navigating the site? Or is that state used at many levels in your tree of components, and using a store will simplify quite a lot of the usage of that global state, rather than using props and emits to go through the whole tree of components to pass some small piece of state? But today the question I want to bring to your mind is, what will make you go further and complexifies your state management solution? Because the solution that we have here works out pretty well for most cases. So you will be reluctant to go a bit more complex by using a store. So going beyond state management is obviously starting by using a store, and you don't always need one or want one. So it's important to note the difference between a bare bones state management solution and a store like Pinia. And more importantly, the difference between these two is actually pretty small. In other words, you can pretty much keep the same code if you want to go with a store like Pinia or even Vuex 5 in the future. So why would you need to use a store? And there are a few reasons actually to use a store, because using these centralized objects don't really scale out well if we keep adding properties to the store. And the first reason that you might come across, and the users that most people will tell you about, is server-side rendering. If you're using Nuxt, if you're rendering your application on the server, or if you're generating your application, you will need to handle that with your global state management solution. And you don't want to reinvent the wheel. So use a store for that. If you want a state that outlives components, which works for this solution, if you want a centralized state shared by many components, because to be real, to be honest, if you have everything on the same object and you just keep adding things to that, that's not going to end very well for your application. So you either have to split it up and handle every single file differently if you want a centralized state management solution, or you can use something like Pinia, where even though you split them up, they still get centralized in one place, which brings you much better developer experience, because they are in one single place, so they can be cataloged by the dev tools. And it's easier for any integration to just add anything they want. For example, better testing strategy with mocks and spies. So you can unit test your components that are using a store without testing the store again. Also plugins. So using what other people have developed. For example, using a local storage plugin for Pinia, you have one online that you can use. And if you don't have that, if you're not using Pinia, you're using a bare bones state management solution, then you have to redevelop your own. And then you can find things like undo, redo, and other things that any other plugin that people use. So integration with Apollo, integration with Xstate, anything you want. So what is Pinia, actually? What if we want to move from that simple state management solution, that bare bones one, to Pinia? So if we take the simple example, when you take the main.js or main.ts file in a fresh project, what you need to start doing is import, create Pinia from Pinia, and create a Pinia, and pass that Pinia to the application. And that is the central piece of how Pinia works, because that instance is going to hold the whole state of all your stores, and is going to be a centralized place where the DevTools and server-side rendering are going to communicate with. So Pinia actually holds a state property that is a ref of an empty object when you create it. And then as soon as you start calling define stores for the first time, it gets populated with whatever state you define. So for example, if we have a useauth store function from a defined store that we created somewhere, and we call that instead of component, the first time it gets called is going to add an object to the pinia.state.value.auth. Another example, we call another store, this one a card one, and it's going to do the exact same thing. It's going to add a card property to a state with the empty, or rather pre-filled state that you want. And I think this simple idea of gathering all your store states in one single object is what makes Pinia so easy to extend. It's what makes it easy to build integrations in like DevTools, the SSR, and also the plugins. And it has been there from the very, very beginning of its creation, which was a long time ago. The first Pinia version appeared before Vue 3, so it was actually only for Vue 2, using the composition API. And at the time, the DevTools 6, which is the current version of the DevTools for Vue 3 and Vue 2, didn't exist or didn't have the API integration that it has today, which is pretty amazing, by the way. Good job by Guillaume. So at that time, Pinia was hacking around the communication channels that were used by the DevTools and Vuex to just display anything that it wanted to add. So its initial version was was lacking a lot of things. So it was not only calling the internal functions of the DevTools, which was a hack. It had duplicate getters and actions per use store. So this was previous to the effect scope API. There was no extensibility or whatsoever through a plugin interface. So you could forget about those local storage plugins or integration with the state, etc. And also there was only an option-based API, which I will talk about a little bit more later. Pinia 2, on the other hand, supports both Vue 2 and Vue 3. It has both an option and setup syntax, similar to Vue. It has advanced DevTools support with the very, very cool V6 of the DevTools. It has hot model replacement, which obviously is something that is pretty necessary today to have a correct developer experience, and was supported by Vuex before. It has a testing module with Pinia testing. It has a Nuxt module for Nuxt 2, Bridge, and 3 with Pinia Nuxt, and it has a type-safe extensibility with plugins. By type-safe, I mean that you can actually really extract the name of the actions and reuse them in custom options. You can really go very far. And another cool thing is that the core of Pinia, its core API, the way you create the stores, the API that you're going to use 80% of the time, is also what Vuex 5 is going to have. It's what makes Vuex 5 go from this API, so Vuex 4 go from this API, create store, a state, mutations, and then using store commit, to a much more simpler define store API with a state that is just a function, and then no more mutations, but just calling any change on the state you want. But that's not the only way of mutating the store, or rather the state, in Pinia. In Pinia, we also have a patch method. And that patch method accepts a partial version of the state that you want to change. So you can pass, for example, an object with a new count value. But you can also pass a function that receives the state as the parameter that allows you to modify the state. And this is useful when you are manipulating collections like a set or an array, a map, where you don't want to replace the whole array with a new one because that will be very expensive. Another especially useful feature in Pinia are plugins. Plugins allows you to subscribe to the store changes, to any state changes, but also to the actions, so you can interject actions before they run or after they run, or if they error. And you can also add any properties you want to every store when they are created. And Pinia plugins are just functions. They receive a context object with the current running application, the Pinia object, the store the plugin is being applied to, and then the options the store was created with. So we have three main things we can do, as I was saying, in Pinia plugins. You can subscribe to state changes, and this is something that exists in Vuex as well. It gives you access to the type of the change, the ID of the store, a payload, depending on how you were modifying that state, and also the current state of the store in question. You can also trigger special behavior with actions. So you can run code before an action runs. You can run code after they have run. You can run code when they fail, or you can even cancel them if you want to. And finally, you can add any properties to your store. So you can return an object of properties that it will get merged with the store. For example, here we are adding a router instance. So we are giving all the stores access to the router. It's also important to note that you should use mark-raw with complex objects. This is a reactivity thing in Vue 3 to avoid deeply observing very complex objects. So any complex object that you pass like this should be marked as raw if you don't care, or you don't know what it contains. And I want to give you an example of an action that I find really nice. This is a simple example of a plugin that sends errors happening in actions to an external service you might use. So for example, something like Sentry. And these 4 lines of code is all you need to report back errors from your stores to detect bugs in production. So as you can see, it has this onError function that receives a callback with any error that happens on actions. And this works for both synchronous and asynchronous errors. Both of them work. And so all of these things together is, in my opinion, what makes Pinia very extensible. In fact, the DevTools API, the DevTools interface that I'm going to show you in a moment is completely handled by a plugin, which is pretty cool. And so now I want to show you this demo. So I have a small page running already. So I have here, I have a Vite project running. And in this project, I have a few pages and I have a few stores. Now this is the playground in the GitHub repository for Pinia. So I don't want to go over everything, but basically I have my own new store that I'm creating. Here is a counter, which by the way I should be naming like this. It has only one state property, and I have added this small snippet of code to handle the hot module replacement, and then nothing else is used. In my page, so my Vue component, I'm using the setup script syntax, so I don't have to export default, and just to be a bit more concise with the color right. I'm using the counter, and then I'm displaying the amount of I have in the store, the double, which is not coded yet, and then I can increment the store by just calling n++ with a button. And then I'm displaying the whole state of the store with the $state property. Now, if I go to the page, I can see here I can increment my store. I can also open the DevTools and I can check in my component that I have the state here, and I can also modify it. I can change it if I want to, anything I want, right? Notice that also the DevTools here appear only for the stores using, for the components using a store. If I check any other component, it won't display the counter because it's not using it, which is pretty cool too. If I go on the custom inspectors here, I can have a Pinia inspector, and I can check all the stores that I have here, all the state, all the getters, or specifically any store I want, I can just check that one. So for example, here I have custom properties. So this is something I added to all the routes, all the stores through a plugin. So I have access to the route. And then I have the state, which I can also modify here. And as you can see, it just works. Then the last thing I have in the DevTools for Pinia is a timeline. Now the timeline here allows me to check for any changes on the store. So as you can see, when I click here, I have small dots and they are mutations that I can check. And so here I have every single mutations. I can check all the mutations here. And I can see that it's changing the n property, and you can see the old value, the new value, and then we have more information to debug if we want to. Now, what's interesting, so here is I can add a getter if I want, getters, and I can say double state.n star2. So that's what I'm using here, double, and if I go back to the page, I should see the double, which definitely is a bug in the hub placement, but whatever. So I have the double here, and then if I want to add a new action, I can add here actions, and I can, for example, create an action that decrements the count to 0. So I say, let's say this is an async function, because I'm going to use the delay here, decrement to 0, and then here I'm going to say while this.n is superior to n, to 0, sorry, I'm going to await 200 milliseconds and I'm going to decrement n, and that's it. Now I go back here, I can create a new button, and here I can do counter.decrement to 0. Now if I click here, I can see how it goes down to 0 a little bit too quick. Right. If I don't use the delay function, it's not going to work. So here, let me increment a little bit, and now I can see how it decrements to 0. Now, what's interesting here is what happens in the timeline. So let me just clear it up so I can see a little better here. Oh, I'm going to increment a little bit here and then decrement to 0. As you can see, every single change of the store is decreasing the state, and we have them grouped in one chunk. And inside, if we look at the group, we can see all the different. Let me just go a little bit bigger here. We have all the different things that happen. Okay. Doesn't like resizing apparently. Let me try again. Oh, it's too low. All right, again. So here, as you can see, we have the start of the action, and so nothing important there. The number of events, the total time, and then each set is going to contain the value is going from, and the value is going to, until the very last one, which is going to set it to 0. And then we can see again the number of events and the total duration of the whole thing. But what is more interesting is that I can run multiple actions at the same time. Let me give you a demo of this. So we clear it up. We have 1000 here. I can call decrement multiple times, and they're going to stack together. And I can even change the store. Let me scroll again. No, it's not showing up. I think it's too small. Now I'm making my computer lag. All right, should have used a smaller number. And I can check the different mutations happening. So I think the dev tools are having a little bit of a hard time. 1000 was a little bit too much. It should be done. So it finishes over 0, still logging all these actions. I think I'm just gonna retry again. So I'm just gonna go here. Let's go for just 100, much easier. There you go. And then once this is cleared, I can call a few of these and increment here. There we go. All right. So here you can see that I have the increment that happened outside. And then we have also the different actions that we have by group. And each of them are separated. They are not put together. And you can increment the store at the same time. We have multiple changes happening to the state from different places, and they all get grouped together without trouble. And then the other thing I want to show you is patch. So we can call patch here to change the store. So for count doesn't make too much sense, but let's say we want to count that amount of time that we decrement the store. So decremented times 0. Now I add this property and you will see that it appears here instantly. So here I can say state dot n plus plus minus minus and state dot decremented times plus plus. All right. So now if I do this, let's clear it up, increment a little bit, and then we decrement to 0. You're going to see that here I have a patch event here that is going to contain all the different things that are changed. So the old value and then the new value here as well. And we can still do these multiple times. So I can just go multiple times increment. And it will happen no matter what. If I don't use a patch, let's say we do this, I will have two mutations happening in the store, so and in a timeline. So I do these, I do decrement multiple times. There we go. And as you can see here, we have two mutations. We have one for n, and then one for decremented times. So patching is also useful for these kind of situations where mutations kind of make sense to be grouped together. And especially when using subscribe, they will trigger only one subscription and not twice. And so this is the option API of the store, which is pretty similar to Vue components after all. So you don't even, if you already know how to do a Vue component, you can think about a Pinia store like a component without a template. But sometimes this is not enough. So imagine you want to have some watcher that you want to trigger when some state changes, like data fetching. I have an example using this of the syntax, which I think is this one. And so here, the define store, instead of having an option, it has a function. And this function is pretty much the same as a setup function in a component. You just create a ref, you can put watchers then. So for example, here we have a current date and we fetch a picture of the day. That's what POT stands for, based on the current date. And then I'm also using a custom composable function, because why not, to cache all the requests I do to that API. And then at the end, so I have my other functions, and then I return everything I want to use, everything I want to expose to the users of the store. So one other thing interesting is that here I can use composable functions, but this is not the only place I can. For instance, with the option API, I can also use composables inside of state. So imagine I want to save the value of the counter to the local storage. I could just use a function that I've written. So in this case, I'm going to use the nice VueUse core library, and I'm going to use local storage like this. So I import the function, and then here I'm going to use local storage demo counter, and then I'm going to say the initial value is 0. And just like that, so I'm going to reload the page because I'm creating a new type of value. although it seems it worked. But just like that, the values that I have here is going to stay in memory. And I didn't have to do any other change here. It just worked. And that's pretty cool. Note that state is the only place where you can apply these. You cannot do it, for example, in an action. You could not. You could do it inside of the action maybe, but that wouldn't be the same as the state. So for more complex use case, you still want to go through the function. So the setup, store, as I call them. All right. And that was pretty much it. That was everything I wanted to show you about stores. I want to say finally, I want to finish by thanking my sponsors who bring me closer to working full-time on open source. If you or your company are using Vue, I have some interesting options for you in my sponsor page, so give them a look. And I hope you give also Pinia a try if you haven't already. Thanks a lot for your attention.